used the name Osama bin Laden something like 200 times on September 11th of 2001. So the contingency planning to blame Al-Qaeda for the event may have actually reached into the American mass media as a result of foreknowledge of the event. But I believe I'm an adherent to the view that they let it happen because if they had prevented the 9/11 event, they clearly would have diminished the value of everything they knew about the future occurring after that event, because that was a hugely impacting historical event.
Well, that creates a weird kind of situation there where you know about the future, but on one hand then can't really do anything about it, so to speak, because you're interested in knowing as well what's going to happen after that event. So you end up in a kind of, you know what's going to happen, but what is the information for it, almost, in a way, if you follow my train of thought there.
Right. So you do things like providing a contract to a television producer to put an inspirational broadcast on American television several nights after the event. You bring a FEMA team into downtown Manhattan on September 10th, which we know they did. You engage in contingency planning. Yeah, so it sets up a paradox. If you do nothing, you can do a maximum amount of contingency planning. But if you decide to do something that prevents the event, you then diminish your ability to do that in the future because you've changed the direction that the future takes. So yes, it is paradoxical, but I believe that that's what happened. That they knew about the event going back 30 years. They may have even scripted things like that famous speech by George W. Bush on the rubble with the fire captain standing next to him with the megaphone.
Right.
You know, they may have set up even that lifting of the flag, the famous lifting of the flag by the three firemen.
Yep.
With the rubble behind them. So they knew that they could see from the chronovisors that, this big area of downtown Manhattan had been reduced to, 3 stories of rubble, splintered of 2 huge office buildings that were the biggest, some of the biggest freestanding structures in the world had just been reduced to a heap of rubble in downtown Manhattan. So they clearly, I think they engaged in contingency planning. They decided to use the event to pass the Patriot Act. They sort of used it to change the worldview of the American people and sort of try to eliminate the Vietnam legacy, the cynicism and opposition to the government that had been fomented during the Vietnam crisis. And yet, I think that ultimately they had prior knowledge. That's my own belief, because yes. I know. Well, actually, let me address that. I know they had by prior knowledge, I know they had the information in their database. But to be fair, since these findings were being dropped into these intelligence reports, and all of us went on and lived our lives for 30 years before the event occurred, I don't know exactly what Donald Rumsfeld was thinking on September 11th of 2001. What I mean is, I know they had the data. Did they have foreknowledge in the sense that they were waiting for it to happen? I don't know that. But when I say I believe that they let it happen, my suspicion is that they had immediate knowledge. They were expecting the event, and therefore they were decided to let it happen, and they had done as much contingency planning as they could. They made sure that Rumsfeld's desk was across the Pentagon and so forth. But do I know, to be fair to everybody who had prior knowledge based on that data entering the Defense Department archive as a result of Project Pegasus being successful in achieving quantum access by 1970, I don't know exactly what was governing their thinking on the morning of the event. I simply don't have that information.
Yeah.
And it's quite possible that information had entered the archives and they had forgotten about it. So to be fair, I don't know exactly what was governing their thinking on the morning of the event. I don't think anybody will ever know.
And it seems like in any regard that they could use, since they have the awareness of this, they could use the event to their advantage to do all the things that you obviously mentioned, to do create almost kind of a theatric little theater around this event, so to speak, in order to propel the nation into going into another war and so forth. We don't know that either, but that seems to be the case in any regard if we consequently looked at what has happened. Andrew,
yes,
I have two more points or comments rather here that I want to touch upon it, and if we can, we can try to keep it brief, and then we can move on. We can take a little break at that point, and then move on to talk about Mars. Okay?
Okay, great.
So one thing was actually about Bill Richardson. Another one wrote here that Bill Richardson is actually a blue-blood Yankee. He grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, and did not move to New Mexico until late 1978. during the time that Basiago claimed he was checking time travels in the New Mexico State House. Bill Richardson was playing amateur baseball. It's a fact because there are actually statistics available for this. Is that a time discrepancy, and any comments on that?
All I can do is tell what I know. And the individual who was taking roll for us when we were teleporting to the Santa Fe State Capitol grounds in the summer of 1970 was Bill Richardson. And he was the Bill Richardson who became governor of New Mexico, because on a project level, his destiny as governor was discussed. And it was also the same Bill Richardson because I met with Governor Richardson in June of 2003 under the pretext of him going up to the old car show, the antique car show in Chama, New Mexico. And you can check online and see that there was an antique car show in Chama in June of 2003. Okay. It was the same Bill Richardson. Now, I have stated in previous interviews and among my research associates, and it's going to be described in my book, that Bill Richardson was not from New Mexico, that he in fact moved there and pursued a political career there, first becoming the congressman from the 3rd District, where the labs are, okay, in the late 1970s. But the person who was taking roll when we would teleport to Santa Fe was a recent college grad from Boston named Bill Richardson. So my point is not, I've never established that or asserted that Bill Richardson is a native New Mexican. In fact, in previous interviews, I've stated that it was in fact his involvement in Project Pegasus as a recent college grad that caused him to be in New Mexico, and I believe he returned to New Mexico to run for Congress from the 3rd District and literally be the congressman for the atomic labs as a result of his earlier involvement in Project Pegasus in the early 1970s. Now, what my research into his career showed is that shortly after college, or it was either the summer before his senior year at Tufts, or what his first job, official job in government, was for a Republican congressman in that summer. So in the same way that Donald Rumsfeld, a Republican, was ostensibly working for the Board of Wage and Price Stabilization for President Nixon, I believe that when a young Bill Richardson, as a recent college grad, was working for a Republican congressman, supposedly in Washington, D.C., he was actually out in New Mexico working on Project Pegasus as a young staffer. So this particular listener's data is incorrect. Bill Richardson was not playing baseball in the summer of 1970. He was working for a Republican congressman, and I believe that was probably being used as a cover to permit him to work secretly on Project Pegasus in the same way that Secretary Rumsfeld's appointment to President Nixon's Board of Wage and Price Stabilization was being used to conceal his project activity. So I stand by my account. I know it was the Bill Richardson because I asked him his name when he was taking roll. They were marching us into this room in the Baton Memorial Building, and we would sit at this little chair with a desk on it across from Bill Richardson. And he would ask our name first and last and have us spell our last name. And in the case of my surname, which is certainly an unusual surname, not just in the United States, but around the world, he had me pronounce and spell my surname. And then I leaned forward and asked him what his name was. And he said, Bill. And I said, Bill what? And he said, Richardson. So I discerned his identity when I was a child on the project. I was then present at a lunch that was taken in Albuquerque where there was chuckling around the table. There was, a spattering of laughter around the table when they had my book, and they said, and Bill, Bill, the young staffer that's taking roll when the kids teleport to Santa Fe, he becomes governor. Okay, so they were actually laughing about the fact that this young staffer was destined to become governor of the state that the project was in. And then I have my own personal meeting with Richardson. The Bill Richardson data point is well established, and I, in fact, going to be making a public appeal to urge Secretary Rumsfeld and Governor Richardson, one a prominent Republican, the other a prominent Democrat, both of whom have either run for U.S. president or been spoken of as potential candidates, in the case of Mr. Rumsfeld, to come forward and confirm that the U.S. achieved teleportation by no later than 1967-68. So I stand by my claim, and I don't find evidence that he was a baseball player that summer. He was working for a Republican congressman, supposedly working for a Republican congressman.
All righty. Okay, well, we have one more comment here then, and this is quite a fun one, actually. See if you have any